Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and rapidly shifting datasets in modern history. We're analyzing the immense scale of global population shifts, specifically zooming in on the demographic map of Muslims in the world. We're going to look closely at the data to understand not just how many people this encompasses, but exactly where they are and where these massive trends are heading. So let's jump right in.
Let me kick things off with a quick question for you. Where do most of the world's Muslims actually live? Be honest, did you immediately picture the Middle East? If you did, you are definitely not alone. It's a super common assumption. But the hard data tells a completely different and frankly much more surprising story. But before we map out where these populations are geographically, we've got to grasp the sheer macroeconomic reality of the numbers. According to the research in our source material, Islam has officially surpassed Roman Catholicism to become the world's largest single religious denomination. I mean, that is a monumental demographic milestone, and it totally sets the stage for everything we're exploring today. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The global Muslim population. 2. Drivers of rapid growth. 3. The 2030 future projection. And 4. The true demographic center. Part 1. The global Muslim population, a data baseline. To really understand where this data is going, we need to know exactly where it started. Our source establishes a firm historical baseline back in the year 2009. At that point, the global Muslim population sat at a staggering 1.57 billion people. To put that into perspective, that was 23% of the global population. So, nearly a quarter of everyone on Earth at that time identified as Muslim. Moving on to Part 2, drivers of rapid growth, beyond the surface.
So, the crucial question here is, what exactly is driving this unprecedented population increase? Well, demographic studies highlight 4 main engines running all at once. First up, you have high Muslim birth rates contrasting with much lower non-Muslim birth rates globally. Second, there are major migration dynamics shifting populations into Western societies. Third, the data points to rising conversions to Islam, particularly in the West. And finally, there's very low attrition, meaning Muslims tend to stay within their faith at much higher rates compared to other groups.
Let's zoom in on that birth rate dynamic for a second, because this is really eye-opening. For any culture to sustain itself over the long haul without relying on migration, demographic models suggest you need a minimum cultural survival replacement rate of 2.11%. But the source points out that the European fertility rate has hovered around just 1.38%. This massive statistical gap, it's basically the primary engine driving these huge structural demographic shifts across entire continents. Check out this chart tracking annual population growth rates for Muslims compared to non-Muslims over time. See that top line? That's the Muslim growth trajectory, and it consistently outpaces the non-Muslim line decade after decade. Even as global growth rates generally slow down for everyone, the gap between the two remains distinct, super clear, and very persistent. Part 3. The 2030 future projection, a demographic shift. Look at the historical stepping stones on this chart. Back in 1990, the total stood at 1.1 billion, jumped to 2010, and it had climbed to 1.6 billion. Now see those gray shaded areas? Those are the projected future numbers based on those exact growth drivers we just broke down. It's a steady, undeniable upward climb that's quite literally reshaping the global demographic pie chart with every passing decade. And that leads us to this massive projected figure for the year 2030, 2.2 billion people. That is the statistical destination of these current demographic trends. It's a staggering figure that represents an immense shift in human geography. To really wrap our heads around that 2.2 billion number, it translates to 26.4% of the projected global population. Let that sink in. By 2030, more than a quarter of the entire human race is projected to be Muslim. In fact, the source data notes that this continuous trend puts the demographic on track to eventually approach 1/3 of the global population. Which brings us to Part 4, the true demographic center, mapping the reality. And this is where we finally answer that hook question I asked you at the very beginning of our explainer. If you're still thinking about this demographic primarily through a Middle Eastern lens, prepare to have that misconception completely shattered. Just look at these comparative facts drawn straight from the data. The Muslim population in the United Kingdom is actually larger than the Muslim population in Lebanon. And get this, the Muslim population in China is bigger than in Syria? The distribution is incredibly vast and highly unexpected if you're only following standard news narratives.
So where are the largest concentrations? Let's look at the top 4 projected Muslim populations for the year 2030. Number 1, Pakistan at an estimated 256 million. Number 2, Indonesia at 238 million. Number 3 is India with 236 million. And number 4 is Bangladesh at 187 million. Notice a trend? The undeniable demographic dominance here is entirely centered in South and Southeast Asian countries. The visual evidence here is just striking. Look at the sheer size of the circles in Asia compared to the rest of the world. It proves that the demographic center of gravity for the Islamic world sits squarely and firmly in the East. And this brings us to a super critical insight highlighted by our source material. These massive population centers in South and Southeast Asia are geographically thousands of miles away from the traditional, geopolitically volatile conflict zones of the Middle East. The everyday demographic reality for the vast majority of the world's Muslims is fundamentally disconnected from the regions we most often see on our TV screens. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought based on the data we've uncovered today. With over a quarter of humanity shifting its demographic center of gravity definitively toward Asia, how exactly will this eastward shift shape global geopolitics, economics, and culture in the coming century? It's a fascinating question, and looking at these numbers, it's pretty much guaranteed to be one of the defining stories of our future. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.